So it is for me an immense honor today that I have been given a very vital duty to have a discussion with the scholar I once read in 2014 in an academic yet fictional piece. And his words still echo in my ears, and I quote, "Who is the real terrorist in this room? What are you saying?" In a claustrophobic concrete cell, two men face each other across a bare table. One is a wanted terrorist, the other a British intelligence officer. But this is no ordinary interrogation. And as they talk deep into the night and violent secrets are revealed, the line between interrogator and confessor begins inextricably to blur. Who then is the real terrorist? And will they pay for their guilt in blood? Unquote. For the first time, I was introduced to the concept of rehumanizing with enemy and ethics of violence, the famous author of The Confession of a Terrorist, the leading thinker, chair in peace studies at the National Center for Peace and Conflict Studies. His research areas include pacifism, anarchism, civilian-based nonviolent national defense, nonviolent resistance movements, unarmed peacekeeping, and critical terrorism studies. As the founder editor-in-chief of Critical Studies on Terrorism and series editor for the Routledge Critical Terrorism Studies book series, he has authored or edited 15 books and over 100 journal articles. Notable recent works include Revolutionary Nonviolence, Encountering Extremism, and the Routledge Handbook of Critical Terrorism Studies. His most cited book is Writing the War on Terrorism, and the one I mentioned, Confessions of a Terrorist. Hare Mai, Professor Richard Jackson, I welcome you, sir. Can you please unmute your mic?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your kind words. For some reason, I can't seem to get a good video picture. I don't know what the issue is there.
Okay, sir. I think we should start the question answer sessions then, as we are running short of time. So my first question from you. So as a critical security studies scholar, how do you read the current moment, which is post-October 7, 2023, in terms of global peace and security as we approach one full year of live, highly visible, non-stop genocide in Gaza?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. In my view, what we are currently witnessing and living through is a full-blown crisis of coloniality. The colonial order, established and maintained, I think, over several centuries, is now under severe strain as a result of Western support for Israel's genocide. And the pacification function of this colonial order is breaking down. In institutional and normative terms, the so-called liberal world order, which in many ways was always a code word for the colonial order, is proving increasingly unable to contain its inherent violent contradictions and the challenges to it. The United Nations, international law, international alliances, all of which were in many ways established to preserve this order, are no longer able to pacify the violence inherent to that order, nor is there a balancing power as there once was during the Cold War. In a way, this is why the UN and the ICJ are proving powerless to stop the US-Israel genocide. I think normatively, the liberal world order led by the colonial powers has lost any last vestige of legitimacy, as it reveals itself to be loyal to the Israeli settler colonial project, whatever the cost to the international legal order, to the lives of Palestinians and Arabs, and to peace and security. The emperor has no clothes, in other words. The liberal world order is revealed as simply a cover for the self-interest of the great Western powers, which are all colonial powers in some way and committed to the settler colonial state of Israel. I think the liberal part of the liberal world order is now revealed to be kind of like a hollow word or a zombie concept. And I think epistemically as well, the colonial order is also crumbling under the assault of the settler colonial violence and the US supported genocide in Palestine. The intellectual foundations of the liberal world order are crumbling, and this is shaking the foundations of many disciplines, including peace studies, um, which has always at its core believed that the Western liberal order is at least benign and at best a force for peace and democracy. I think the current crisis shatters this illusion and reveals the racist othering and ordering and foundations of the field and its tacit commitment to the maintenance of coloniality. Now, the pressing issue is that whenever a long-established social order like this starts to crumble, it creates instability, disorder, and violence. There is a power vacuum, and with a power vacuum comes the potential for mass destruction. I think as peace scholars, we have a role in trying to mitigate this possibility and to work hard for non-violent solutions. On the other hand, and the other side of the coin, is that the decline of a social order is also a time of hope for a new kind of social order, a new dispensation, which could emerge from the ashes of the old. So I think in a way we're kind of in this interregnum period between the decline of the colonial order and the beginning of something new.
You're right, you mentioned crumbling reality of coloniality, and this is a pressing issue. But the widespread suppression of truth, manipulation of facts, convenient unsaying of Gaza, in dominant discourses of peace and security demonstrate the deep-rooted connections between epistemic hegemonies and genocide. So the contradiction of the Western liberal framework in terms of equality of all human beings have never been so obvious in my view. How do you view the credibility loss of the dominant liberal peace discourses,
Well,
and
look,
what kind of thinking, action, and maybe frameworks may emerge from the student intifada across the globe?
Well, first of all, I'd say I agree fully with your analysis. There's a huge credibility lost for the Western liberal framework. And as I said before, I think the crisis of coloniality that we're witnessing has a discursive and epistemic dimension as well as a hard security dimension. The fact is that the contradictions of the so-called liberal peace, I think, are now laid bare, and everyone can see that the United States and its close allies are not a force for good in the world, but the upholder of an oppressive settler colonial system in which the lives of millions of people are considered less worthy of life and freedom than others, and human rights are reserved for the few at the expense of the many, which, historically speaking, is exactly the same moral and political order which was established during the age of imperialism and colonialism. As a consequence, the dominant liberal peace paradigm, I think, has lost any trace of credibility in peace studies. And if it's to retain any relevance and any normative or political value, we have to abandon much of its core theory, its frameworks, its assumptions, its policy commitments, and so on. In a way, it has to go back to the beginning. It has to start over. And actually, this is where I'm somewhat optimistic. I think the student intifada, which has emerged across the world and which demands not just an end to the genocide in Palestine, but is also calling for the wider decolonization of the academy and of universities and of society, provides the foundation for a new kind of peace theory, one rooted in decoloniality, in social justice, in abolition, in reparations, in intersectionality, in ecological care, and in an expanded pluriversal conception of human rights and human dignity. And I think your critical peace research group is part of this, as is the centre that I work at here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We are trying to revise our curriculum to foundationally critique the old moribund an oppressive liberal peace paradigm, but also at the same time to explore indigenous peace practices and indigenous epistemologies of peace, justice, harmony, and balance. We're trying to take a more holistic view, which recognizes the connections and interdependencies between settler colonialism in Israel and the United States and New Zealand, as well as the universities and the ecological crisis that we're all facing. And we're also trying to explore alternatives to these dominant traditions of liberal peace, which are incredibly instrumental and still infused with coloniality. It's actually quite encouraging to me to see all around the world non-Western peace theory start to emerge and express itself with confidence and clarity. In Pakistan, where you are, but also in Kenya, New Zealand, Latin America, and elsewhere. I think it's in these non-Western indigenous spaces that we need to look for the new paradigms and approaches which can fill the vacuum left by the collapse of the liberal paradigm in the ashes of Gaza. The old order is dying, but a new, potentially transformative, pluriversal, and genuinely emancipatory order is starting to become visible. Your center and the work that you and your colleagues are doing, I think, is contributing directly to this important emergent process, as well as the work of many others, including the students around the world who are currently campaigning.
You're right, sir, that reinstating indigenous knowledge is the need of time. I agree the old order is dying and new is emerging. But being a student and a PhD scholar myself, uh, I would like to ask you one last question. What, in your view, is credible knowledge of peace and security in 2024 and beyond? Or those knowledge, or whose knowledge is, I must ask, is credible? In our part of the world, the criteria of credible knowledge is all domains, including peace and security, continue to be imported from the West and accepted uncritically. They tell us what to do and how to do it, and we accept it. So, what is your take on credible knowledge making in the domain of peace and security after October 2023?
Great question. There are many places, I think, to look for credible knowledge of peace and security and many sources of it. But what we need to do in the first instance is recognize that the West and its institutions, paradigms, and approaches are no longer credible. Empirically, we can see they've failed, and they've failed miserably. They've caused untold suffering and reinforced oppression for millions of people for hundreds of years. They've also brought on the climate catastrophe, which is now unfolding before our eyes. And this is not out of mere mistakes or poor judgment or bad actors. This is because this knowledge is built into the system. It's built on racist, colonial, epistemic foundations. So we have to stop looking to the West for credible knowledge, especially about peace, security, and social justice. I think the first place we need to look for credible knowledge is from the subaltern, from the oppressed, from those who feel the effects of coloniality and violent oppression on their bodies and on their psyches and their emotions every single day. And obviously this includes women in every society, refugees, the poor, and those at the bottom of the international and local social orders. So we need a local bottom-up knowledge, not a top-down expert knowledge. And I think also this is going to be a non-Western knowledge, and in many places, an indigenous knowledge. Indigenous people have survived for thousands of years, and for hundreds of years, they've survived the worst, most totalizing forms of violence. And yet they've retained their culture, their dignity, even as they've lost their land and their resources. I think as a consequence, they have a lot to tell us about peace, security, justice, and reconciliation. So the point is that we have to stop assuming that Western knowledge is the arbiter of truth, the guarantee of success, or even that Western knowledge is objective or neutral knowledge. It's the coloniality of knowledge. And here we have to admit the emperor has no clothes. So we have to look elsewhere for credible knowledge. And this is what I believe that you are doing in your decolonial critical peace project, and it's what we are trying to do in our decolonial critical peace project as well. And I stand in solidarity with you, and I wish you all success and hope that your project succeeds. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Can't agree more, because non-Western knowledge is not credible at all. And you said that indigenous knowledge must be reinstated. So I take the liberty of saying thank you to you in Maori. Tenako toe hua reva. Thank you, sir. Over to Lahore again. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to have you again in our future talks.
I would really enjoy that. Thank you very much for having me, and good luck with your day.
Thank you, sir. You too.
It was